I've played a lot of Super Nintendo games, but not nearly as many as I would like. Since the beginning of my streaming career, I've given power to my viewers to dictate what I play, and I do that to avoid burnout on a platform where it's common. As a neurospicy veteran, it helps remove that element of choice, so you'll always see me bobbing and weaving between various systems or various franchises. Also, I'm sick of shit, so please be patient with me. With that being said, today I'm going to embarrass myself and share with you 10 popular Super Nintendo games I have never played. Let's begin. When you think of the compilations to rule all compilations on the Super Nintendo, you might think of Super Mario All-Stars, which, don't get me wrong, that's a great compilation. Seeing all of these epic NES Mario titles reimagined in the 16-bit world is a magical thing. But I've never had the chance to play Kirby Superstar, and that's mostly because where my rules of release currently dictate I play games in the order that they were released, my next Kirby game is Kirby's Adventure on the NES. Now, the interesting thing about Kirby Superstar is that you get 7 games, and one of them is an update to one that I've already played, Kirby's Dream Land. But even then, I do want to follow those rules of release. If I do manage to make it to Kirby Superstar in this lifetime, I'll have Spring Breeze, Dynablade, Gourmet Race, The Great Cave Offensive, Milky Way Wishes, The Arena, and Revenge of Meta Knight to look forward to. This is a cute game, and honestly, I want it on true hardware because I think Arya would absolutely adore it. For a long time, I didn't like JRPGs, and the ones that I did like as a kid, I didn't really know they were JRPGs. I thought they were just action games with extra steps, such as Dragon Age, Kingdom Hearts, or even Chrono Trigger, right? As an adult, I appreciate them. I appreciate the attention to detail, the music, the stories, the investment that we have to make, and how the game flow tends to go. Now, many people tell me that Secretive Evermore is a lot like Secretive Mana, because most of the elements of Secretive Mana were reutilized to some capacity, like the interfaces and the gameplay aspects, but others say it isn't fun, that the alchemy process as a magic system is tedious and annoying. Now bear in mind, I'm not a fan of Secretive Mana, so I don't know how I'm going to feel about this one. I do own it. It's been on the shelf for quite a while. I just don't tend to play JRPGs back to back, otherwise I feel like I would get tired of playing them, and that's a genuine concern with my mental health. And I'm not afraid to mention that. Nobody should be. If you have borderline personality disorder like I do, one of the easiest things to do is mentally fall into this fuck this category and never pick up the controller again, and sometimes that spreads to entire genres, and I don't want that to happen. No matter what though, I do look forward to playing this at some point. Hey, UN Squadron. If you've watched my videos previously, you know I don't like horizontal shooters, and that boils down to 2 words: death zones. One of the appeals of vertical shooters is that I have a freedom to move around the map. Granted, some vertical shooters make use of death zones, and guess what, I avoid those. But to be honest, I can count on one hand how many horizontal shooters I actually like, and UN Squadron is one of those. Now, this game is based on a manga, Area 88, but I took it at face value, a badass horizontal shooter that let us fly as either Shin Kazama, Mickey Simon, or Greg Gates. I liked how there was a variety in what aircraft our protagonists flew, Shin with his F-20 Tiger Shark, Mickey with his F-14 Tomcat, and Greg with his A-10 Thunderbolt. I appreciated the energy bar that Capcom decided to utilize in lieu of one-hit deaths with reserve lives, and I appreciated being able to buy power-ups. It's good, clean fun in the arcades, but for the life of me, I've never taken the time to play the Super Nintendo version. Now, the Super Nintendo version is oftentimes given rave reviews, but the game does work differently on a fundamental level. Instead of having specific airplanes, we instead have to start with an F-8 Crusader and work our way up buying other airplanes and weapons with the money that we get. I believe the common strategy is just to get good with the F-8, then buy the best of the best when you can afford it. At some point I'll check it out, and to be honest, I do look forward to playing it. But as much as I love UN Squadron in the arcades, I really do prefer the spiritual successor, Carrier Air Wing, which was only released in the arcades. One of the series that I've always dreaded playing was Ghosts and Goblins, mainly because my introduction to the franchise was a horrible reattempt at a spin-off known as Maximo. That game's dog shit. but Maximo wasn't the first time that Ghosts and Goblins had a spin-off. Prior to the two-trick pony Maximo we had Gargoyle's Quest, a 3-game franchise that from what I've heard is pretty interesting. The first 2 are on the Game Boy, but the third, that's a game and a half right there, Demon's Crest. Now, Demon's Crest is one of those games that you'll see end up on a few lists. The music is great thanks to Toshiko Horiyama. With its gothic classical sound, the game is incredibly difficult and it's great looking. And unfortunately, it's pretty expensive loose, going for about $150 on average, so there's 4 lists for you right there. The game itself is wonderful though. We play as Firebrand, who is actively seeking these crests to combine them to get unlimited power, and he's got 5 of them. But the 6th, the Heaven Crest, is currently being held by a demon dragon, so they fight, Firebrand wins, but then this rival demon, Phalanx, shows up with his money in the bank briefcase and yoinks them all. Uh-oh! So our whole job is to go recover all of the crests and defeat Phalanx. Now what's so cool about this game is that it has 4 different endings, one of which is hidden. It involves beating the game with the 3rd ending and starting a new game with a password, unlocking what is essentially New Game Plus or a second quest. Now this shouldn't come as a surprise because historically the Ghosts and Goblins franchise has always been a twofer, right? Gotta beat it twice. So when I do play this, count on me beating it twice. I love the original Punch-Out. It's one of those rite of passage games that most of us enjoyed at some point in our lives. From an arcade game to a spin-off arm wrestling game in the arcades to the NES game featuring Iron Mike Tyson, many folks wanted more from the franchise, and Super Punch-Out was the answer. Now, because this is the Super Nintendo, there are occasions where the game's skeleton is straight up yanked from the previous generation of gaming and given a fresh coat of paint, and for the most part, this is exactly that, a better version of the first game on a newer generation console. And many of the characters we loved from the NES game, believe it or not, weren't there. In fact, the only ones that carried over were Bald Bull, Mr. Sandman, and Super Macho Man. The rest were new. Someday I'll play it and I'll likely piss blood when I get my ass kicked yet again by Mr. Sandman. Bury me with my money. So I've never played this. The only reason I know that quote is because it was a donation alert sound effects for one of my friends on Twitch. Sunset Riders is a side-scrolling run-and-gun, and it's one that I was hoping to get to on my Konami Conquest, but we didn't make it that far. The project was changed right at 1987, and this game came out in 1991 in the arcades, with a 1993 Super Nintendo port. The whole theme of the game revolves around the Wild West. We play as one of 4 different bounty hunters, Steve, Bob, Cormano, or Billy, and we have a rogues gallery of 8 different outlaws that we need to introduce to God. In terms of the port, there really weren't that many noticeable changes. In fact, most of the changes aligned with censorship rules. For example, Stage 6, they yanked the Native American enemies and replaced them with regular enemies that we would see throughout the game. I know that this was released on the Genesis as well, but I've heard rough things about it. Like, it's basically 50% of the game in terms of bosses, and you can only play as 2 of the characters. I don't know which ones they are, as I've never personally played that one, nor have I seen my peers play it, but if you know, feel free to share your knowledge with the community down in the comment section below. Oh, hi, Earthbound. Been a minute. When I make these episodes, I take into consideration the responses that I get from you all, and I don't know if Earthbound was popular or if it's a cult classic in its own way, but a lot of you who watch my stuff have experience with this game, and for me, the only thing I know about it is the story and the music. The game takes place in the 90s. We have Ness, who gets aroused from his rest by a meteorite, which to be honest is probably the only rational thing that happens in this game. And we learn of a really bad alien dude named Gygus, who is a force of bullshit, who makes everything around him cranky. So we have to go around and collect songs to stop him. That's the extent of the knowledge that I have for this, and I've always wanted to play this game, but my rules of release dictate that I have to work through Mother 1 before I play this. Part of me doesn't look forward to it because I'm so used to the standards of JRPGs and RPGs at the time, and I know that Earthbound breaks free from the norm. And to me, it's not that impactful if the mechanics never made a return, if that makes sense. I guess in some ways, the only game to really remind me of Earthbound in a modern sense would be Undertale and Deltarune, and I haven't played either one of those. It's been a long time since I talked about Natsume. Wild Guns to me is one of the coolest games I've seen but never had the chance to play. It's a space western shooting gallery game where we play as either Annie or Clint, and we move around essentially dodging bullets and taking out the bad guys, of which is a medley of steampunk and sci-fi elements. So you'll see steam-powered robots and stuff. It's awesome. I think I talked about it in the top 10 best co-op games on the Super Nintendo, and to be honest, it reminds me of Cabal. You remember Cabal? The whole I stand in the foreground while you die in the background, and if I die you cheated game? Yeah. Love those kinds of games. I was impressed by the art direction as well. The art was designed by the same guy who did Shatterhand and Pocky and Rocky 2, Shunichi Taniguchi. And I will say this game is very expensive, which is kind of frustrating, but they did remake it. Oddly enough, and I think it was 2016 for the PS4. I do know that it's known as Wild Arms Reloaded, and I've heard it isn't that bad. Might be worth checking out. First we had Mega Man, then Dr. Light pulled an Andy and decided he didn't want to play with him anymore, and he created X. Just kidding, that's not how it happened at all. In fact, X was created as an answer to a future where Dr. Light wouldn't exist anymore. He's still relevant though, right? He pops up in holographic projections, but this series is effectively the more edgy and serious Mega Man line of games. In fact, it takes place 100 years after the original Mega Man games. X, being totally sentient and in control of his own free will, creates other free-willed robots known as Reploids, but some of them, they turn bad, and they're known as Mavericks. All of the Mavericks align with this big bad guy named Sigma, so there's your plot. Now, Mega Man as a franchise is weird to me because usually I play games in order, but there are instances where I break free from direct release restrictions. Kingdom Hearts is a prime example because the story is so fuck-busted that you almost have to play it in storyline order. Whereas for Mega Man, I've decided to play the main core line games from the NES era, and the storyline that it follows up to the modern games Mega Man 10 and 11, etc., before jumping to the other spin-offs such as X, Zero, Battle Network, you know, the works. By the way, if you want to know more about Mega Man, I actually did a Ready Go Gaming show all about every single Mega Man game ever and its history. It's not a podcast, it's a documentary. I'll link it at the end of the video and down in the comment section below. I know most people won't like long-form videos filled to the brim with information, but if you want something fun to listen to while you're driving or something to veg out to, that's a great series. Well, I've certainly got my fair share of public floggings from the comments section when I admit to not playing Super Metroid. I get it. It's a great game. It probably was the bread and butter of your childhood, but I don't hold any nostalgia for it, nor do I hold any love for Metroid. As it stands in the rules of release, my next Metroid is Metroid 2: Return of Samus. And I know many of you will likely be like, well, if you don't like Metroid on the NES, you're probably not gonna like it on the Game Boy, so stop being a fucking dildo and play Super Metroid. But I stick to the rules. I really do try to keep that tradition going. Speaking of that tradition, it stems from my dad's demand to watch movies in the order that they were released. It was the same for books. While other kids were buying modern comics, Dad was bringing me to the library to get the compilations of the original runs of X-Men and Superman. It's always been that way for me. Now, Super Metroid is gorgeous. I have to give it that. It's a damn good looking game, and the sound engineering of it exudes everything that sounded wonderful on the Super Nintendo when someone capable was at the helm. But I need to power through Metroid 2, and once I do that, I'll be able to start Super Metroid and let you all know how I feel about it. And that's it for today's episode. What did you think of this list? Are there any popular games on the Super Nintendo that you haven't played? If so, feel free to share it with the community down below. Luckily for all of us, this community isn't filled to the brim with gatekeeping goonasses that will peg you in the ass for not sharing their ideas, and it's so refreshing to have an open dialogue, so thank you, truly, for being kind to each other. By the way, if you made it to the end of this episode, you're already home in our community. We're a group of video game enthusiasts that love remembering a time when life was just a little bit easier to live. And if that's something you align with, feel free to subscribe. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly impacts the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.